Well, I'm sure you saw that title, heavily discounted prices. Exactly what does that mean? What it means is about half of what Summit's discount prices are. $500 on Summit, $250 on here or thereabouts. Just check this out. Okay, what's the reason for this sale? As is so often the case, I get many parts left over from projects I do for companies. Some of them you don't read about. They ask me to be discreet on it, and usually at the end of the day, whatever parts are left over and all that, it's usually more work to just put them back in stock or whatever. I end up with them. So eventually they begin to overcrowd my somewhat limited 1400 square foot shop. So I've got to get rid of them, especially as I'm trying to go over the shop here and A, build a new studio, and B, build a grinding room extension. Right, so what I've got here is a bunch of camshafts and an intake manifold in this sale, but I'm hoping to keep on going with these sales. So here we go, big block Chevy camshafts. Now before we get into the specs of these cams, let me say one thing here. Anyone that's familiar with big block Chevy cams will notice that my cams have tighter lobe centerline angles than you typically see. Now, these aren't lobe centerline angles that I like. They're lobe centerline angles that the engine likes. There's a difference. Those 110, 112, even as much as 114 lobe centerline angles are not what the engine wants at the kind of compression ratios that we would normally use for street or street strip engines. Those very wide lobe centerline angles only work with very big valve heads and a lot of compression. And I'm assuming you're building a big inch engine. You're not building some de-stroked 300 cubic inch screamer, right? We're talking about 454 to 475, and that's just a big overbore. And engines that go from 485 to 540 cubes. So the spec of all of these cams has already been tested in the engines that I'm going to recommend that you use them in. So if you use them in those engines, then you will see with a 10.5 compression almost 1.4 foot-pounds per cube. That's what you're looking for, is torque. If you get that torque number right, that means you've got the cam event timing right. And if you get that right, you'll get the horsepower anyway. So there's no, well, we wanted torque, so, or we wanted horsepower. You'll get the best of both worlds, but the first deal is to get the torque up to its maximum potential. That means getting the lobe centerline angle right. Now some of you are going to say, can't have it that tight, it won't idle. that shows that how much BS you've been fed during your lifetime. The idle speed is not dependent on the lobe centerline angle. It's the overlap that's the final decider of how good the idle is. So if you're in a position where you have to spread the lobe centerline angle to get it to idle, you've selected the wrong cam. You've got to pick the duration that will give the right overlap whilst having the correct lobe centerline angle. Right? That lobe centerline angle within the realms of what we're doing is not an adjustable factor. So now we've discussed that, let's get on with the number one camshaft here. Flat tappet, hydraulic, nitrided camshaft. Now here's the spec of the nitrided hydraulic flat tappet. You will do well to note that I never use a comp cam's flat tappet cam that has not been nitrided. Should you buy this cam, you will also get a bottle of what is most likely the best break-in fluid for camshafts on the market, and that's free. That's a $20 free gift there. Now, with flat tappet cams, it pays to invest in good lifters, and I recommend for this cam the armor faced GM lifters. That's the one with the stellite face. You can see where it's been put on the front face. They're virtually bulletproof, so you're going to be putting a bulletproof lifter onto a nigh on bulletproof camshaft there. Now, the reason that I use flat tappet cams, especially shorter ones, is that if the cam is under about 274 degrees, which is what this one is, the advantage of the profile goes to the flat tappet, not what you might think, the roller. Right? So this is on that limit. So for a lot less money, I can get a roller cam performance for flat tappet price. Also, something to note here is that this is on a 106 lobe centerline angle. This cam will work very well in a 454 with intake valves up to 2.25. If you're trying to keep the budget down and you're using stock heads and you have something like a 2.180 valve, I think it is, then this works very well. It's about the right deal for it. And the compression needs to be 10.5 to 1. If you're building a 496 with the biggest valve possible, and that's usually a 2.3, this cam will be perfect for low speed torque and a very respectable top end horsepower. Now, in the 496 with a 10.6 to 1 compression with this cam, I've seen 1.41 foot-pounds per cube. That outdoes most other people's 540s. Please note that. Overlap 62 degrees. As I said before, it's not the lobe centerline angle that governs idle, it is the overlap. With 62 degrees, this is relatively short. It's in the range that stock cams reside in. Lobe lift 336, and I recommend if you're building a 496, you use it with 1.8 rocker ratios. That will give you a 605 thousandths lift. I think I've said about everything with that, so let's move on to camshaft number 2. Now let's take a look at the specs for camshaft number 2. This, and it's over there and I'm reading it off the screen, right? This is what I would say is a relatively soft race cam. And I say that with due deference to the fact that that phrase should not make you think it's not good for horsepower. It is. Now, let me explain what we've got here. We're going to look at the difference between the advertised duration and the 50 thousandths duration. And in this cam, 303 is the advertised duration on the intake and 270 at 50. So the difference between the two is 33 degrees. So it goes from 20 thousandths lift to 50 thousandths lift in 33 degrees. Now, a pro stock cam, or that style of cam, is typically around 28 degrees. So what I'm saying is here, it's like a safe pro stock cam. Not going to make the same power as if it had a faster acceleration, but this is a cam you can put into your street strip car, and so long as you do not over rev it and cause the valves to float, which is very bad for a roller cam because it absolutely destroys the bearings in the rollers. Roller cams are normally very reliable except when they're over revved, so note that. So I'm thinking that this cam should be good with the right springs on it for probably as much as 20,000 miles. Not bad for a street strip style cam. Anyway, if you don't want to achieve the maximum RPM out of it, i.e. right round to the red line, positioned 500 to 700 RPM above peak power, you can use lesser springs on it. Now let's carry on down the list. The difference between the intake and exhaust on this is 8 degrees, and it is intended to have peak power around about 7,200 on an engine built with the kind of spec you should be building for one armed with a cam like this. And going on down further, the overlap is 91.5 degrees. Now, by the time you get to 100 degrees, you can pretty much figure it's a real race cam you've got. This is just falling shy of being what I would call an all-out race cam. You could say that it's the road race version of a proper drag race cam. You know, just ease up on everything so that it lives. So 91.5 degrees. Load lift 434 thousandths on the intake, 438 on the exhaust. Now, if you select your push rods and rockers correctly, you'll find that that will end up with slightly more lift on the intake than exhaust. And if you use 1.8 rockers, that should give you a lift approaching 790 thousandths. So it's pretty healthy lift there. Needless to say, you want to use this with big valves because that's the way it pairs best in a big block system. Now, idle vacuum, that's going to depend on how good you build the engine. Remember, those total seal rings will give you a little more vacuum than regular rings. And also, it depends on how well you time the cam in, what the compression is, etc., etc. Now, if you get all of this correct, then on something around 500 inches, you should have about 10 inches of vacuum, 9 to 10. And if you build a 540 with it, which needs to be up there in compression, i.e. not less than 13 to 1, you could see as much as 12 inches, maybe 13. This cam will have quite a big lope to it on a 500-inch engine. I say big, not excessive, and a lesser lope on it, but still very noticeable on a 540. Now let's go on down the list in here. If you want to use it on a 454 to, I don't know, about 480, I think 485 is a big overbore on a 454, then you'll need to use that with a compression ratio of around 10.5 minimum to about 12 to 1. And that cam, it'll come on the cam with a pretty good bang, right? Not a lot of torque under 2,000, but when it gets to about 3, hell, it's off. So we'll go on one of those. Now let's look at the rest of it here. Yes. I looked up my notes on this, and I built an engine like this years ago with virtually these profiles on. I think comps updated them, but that engine made 1.43 foot-pounds per cube with 11.5 to 1 compression. And it was a simple build, single 4-barrel on a race manifold. I think it was one of the first manifolds that Darren Morgan designed for mass production, and that's the one sold by, and I'll put their name going by under here. Anyway, it's a good cam, so price on it is going to be $270 plus post and package. Well, on to camshaft number 3. This, for the street, is a really nice hydraulic roller that basically, if you want a high performance street engine, this is it. It really hauls the goods. Starting at the top of the page, we have the fact that it's a hydraulic roller, and we've got the factory grind number for it. Lobe center line 112. Now that's wider than I would normally use, but there was a reason for that. First, this cam was originally intended for use in a boat motor, so we spread the lobe center line angle to avoid sucking in water in an underwater exhaust. Secondly, the guy wanted a good range of RPM, so with a limited overlap of 76 degrees, we got the RPM by extending the length of the duration, but maintaining the lobe center line angle that we selected. And it worked out pretty good. The recommended usage is in a boat motor or a car where you require a smooth idle, virtually no lope, about an 800 RPM idle, and the engine needs to be done with the thought of keeping the compression ratio as high as possible, consistent with the octane of fuel you use. Now I want to elaborate on that. This cam really needs absolute minimum of 10.5 to 1 in a 454 or 468 motor, and if it's given that, it will have a very wide RPM range. It'll have reasonable low speed torque to get a boat or a car moving easily, and it will make about 1.32 to 1.35 foot-pounds of torque if the engine's built properly. Now, it says in there you use a 2.3 intake valve. Yes, I'm going to expand on that. It needs a 2.3 intake valve with very good low lift flow. That valve has got to look bigger than 2.3, so we need it to work the best we possibly can get it to do. It needs the chamber to be cut with a quench plateau. Now, if you don't know what that is, look through some of my older videos and it will tell you some things about squish and quench. That will be worth 20 horsepower and probably about 10 foot-pounds of extra torque, especially low down. So that will offset the fact that it's a wide lobe center line angle to an extent. Not a complete fix, but if you do that, the cam will operate like it's more like 110, 111 lobe center line angle. Now, what else? That's about it. I think that if you follow all the rules, you'll pick this cam for an application that's well suited. Now let's move on to something pertinent to all three of these cams. Okay, last item on our list. It's a Dart tall deck big block intake manifold. Now, I've got this one left over. It's brand new. I say left over. When they came out, Dick Maskin sent me, I don't know, must have been half a dozen of these to cut in various ways to test. I think he used the information in terms of just telling customers if they wanted to upgrade. But I don't think, well, and know for a fact, he never actually used any of the mods we developed. But we did get this manifold up from its basic configuration and carburation well up on the power scale, probably 35 horsepower. But the biggest move we made was to change it from a 4150 to a 4500 style carburetor. So please note that. Now, it's a tall deck. It needs to have a spacer put on it, which converts it from a 4150 to a 4500 and blend it in. And, well, let me show you the manifold. Well, this is our Dart intake manifold here, and you can see this takes a 4150. Now, really, a 4150 is not big enough for any power potential that a tall deck big block has. This responds very well to a spacer to take a 4500 and then blending this here into the 4500 adapter so that you've got smooth turns in there. Also, the edge that I'm going to arrow for the 5/7 cylinders, that's those over there, you will need to knife edge the edge I'm going to show on number 5 cylinder. The divider needs to be knife edged so that the knife edge is on the number 7 side. This is because 7 robs 5. So you need to make a better entry for 5 and a worse entry for 7 so that it's tend to draw the air from further to the, what on this shot is the bottom cylinders over here. Now then, because it's a tall deck block and not many of you have those, and because it's not the best out there, when you've done the mods I've mentioned, it works really good. But still the best manifold out there is the one from Profiler, Sniper Junior. However, that's going to cost you like $700 or $800. This, $75. You can't complain at that price. $75. So if you want it, all the address is as follows.